Hey folks, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. We're going to have episode 10 of our garden questions and answers. Look at that. It's 30% humidity. It's not bad. And it's only 97 degrees. It's tolerable today. All right, well, here I am sitting in the garden on an unusual June cool evening. It's not 150 degrees out here, and it's dry. I can actually sit out here and not get heat stroke, so that's a nice thing. But the heat certainly has been doing a number on my gardens, and I've got the best looking view of my garden in the background here. Some of it's really, really bad over there. But yeah, so for our first question today, Sagaciously Sage asks, can some of the foliage be replanted and eventually develop into another tomato plant? Speaking of tomato plants that are suffering from the heat, that are heat damaged and are dying off, can you trim off bits and pieces of tomato foliage and plant them up as a whole new plant? The answer to that is usually yes, you can, especially if you got a pretty good sized, well-developed sucker. You can trim that right out of there and put it in a jar of clean water, non-chlorinated water if you have it, and it will generally develop roots, and then you can plant that. Or, as I've done in the past, you can simply take a trimming, shove it in the ground in some good soil and keep it moist, and that tomato will develop roots and usually give you a completely new clone of the original plant. And so my single seed challenge is just out of view over there, and it's really pathetic. It died, the spider mites got it because it was dying, and there's nothing left of it but a single little growing tip. Let me show you what I did with that growing tip. So here's an example right here. This is all that is left of my single seed challenge. My single seed challenge died. A combination of heat stress attracted spider mites, and heat and spider mites combined are a quick death. This was the growing tip from one of the branches, and so I snipped it off. I brought it in, I dunked it in soapy water to kill the spider mites. I rinsed it off and placed it in this distilled water, and hopefully this will sprout roots and my single seed challenge will get a second lease on life. So yes, the answer is with tomatoes you can always take your trimmings or your prunings and you can make new plants out of them if you want. Okay, the second question is kind of a combination of questions. I get a lot of comments in the comment threads of my videos saying, hey, I've got a squash plant and the leaves are turning yellow and the edges are getting brown. What's wrong with my plant? Or, hey, I've got a tomato plant and the leaves are curling and turning splotchy. What's going on? Or, you know, things like that. Hey, what's wrong with my plant? Friends, as much as I'd like to help you, I can't always help you with that kind of limited information. I would need to have several pictures of your plant. I'd need to know the growing conditions of your plant, the temperatures of your growing area. I would need to know what's in your soil, what kind of soil you had. It's kind of hard to just answer those kinds of questions. So I have a tip for you. What you can do is just use Google, and Google, for example, you got a squash plant that's having trouble. Google common squash problems. If you've got beans that are having trouble, Google common bean problems. And what's going to happen is you'll usually be brought to a website that'll show you different kinds of conditions, diseases, stresses, or various things that affect your plants, you know, watering deficiencies, what over-fertilizing looks like. And they'll usually have pictures and descriptions, and you can look at that and figure out what's going on with your plants. Because, I mean, I don't have as much information to go on as you do. And you can take those pictures that you find by Googling common squash problems or common tomato problems. And usually you'll find your answers that way. So make use of the resources you have. I mean, I'll try, but more often than not, when somebody asks me what's wrong with my plants, I really can't tell. I really don't have a clue unless I see a lot of pictures and know all that stuff. So there's a tip. Use Google and combine the plant you have with common problems. And that'll usually turn up a website, maybe several, that'll tell you what's going on within the first 10 hits. Question number 3 comes from Me B. Me B asks well, Me B agrees that long beans are fabulous. This was a question in one of my videos where I featured my long beans. But wow, the aphids are overwhelming. I can't keep up. Any recommendations? Yeah, when you grow long beans, I found that there are certain kinds of certain kinds of crops that just really attract aphids, and yard long beans or Chinese long beans, Thai long beans, whatever you want to call them, man, aphids just crawl all over those things every time I plant them. And this year is no different. I've already done what I'm going to suggest, so I don't know when we go over and take a look if I'll actually be able to show you how bad the aphids were. But I get black aphids here, and they completely cover the plant. The plant tends to keep on growing, but aphids are all over. I also find a lot of aphids on my cowpeas when I grow cowpeas each year. So here's what you do. You can do the easy way, which is take a water hose and just spray them off. Just hose that thing down really well. And usually that takes care of your aphid infestation for a week or two. Just hose those aphids off. They can't survive. It's separated from their host plant, and that kind of does it. If you really want to go nuclear on them, get some neem oil, cold pressed neem oil, mix it up according to the instructions on the bottle. Shake that sucker up real good with some dish soap and spray down your plant with that neem oil. And that neem oil will not only kill the aphids, but it will kill any aphids that return while that neem oil is still there, because neem oil tends to kill off chewing and sucking animals, sucking insects like aphids. If you don't want to go with neem oil, you can just use dish soap. Put a tablespoon of dish soap in some water in a sprayer and mix that up and just spray. And that will coat those aphids, and it will help to suffocate and kill them. So yeah, aphids are actually fairly easy to control. The most easy way is just hose those suckers off of there, and they usually will come back a couple of weeks, just hose them off again, and eventually they diminish to the point where they're irrelevant. I also have had certain crops that were just black with aphids that just kept growing anyway, and cowpeas are one of those. I'll be planting cowpeas probably this week, and I expect to be able to see some aphids. Let's go over the long beans and see if there's any aphids over there right now. All right, here's my long beans, and yes, there are some aphids in there. I don't know if you can see that, but what's in there right now is nothing compared to what it was the other day. It was black with aphids. Look at all those aphids right there. Yep, tons of aphids. And so all I'll do is come along here and just spray those guys off with the water hose. You can see a lot of aphids there. But this plant continues to grow. They were covering the whole plant. I sprayed it down mostly and about a week ago, so you can see that now they're starting to come back, and I'll need to come out and hose them off again. But yeah, they just come off real easy with water. All right, question number 4. 468 Strings says, after your plants are finished harvesting for the year, what do you do with the plant? I have started a compost bin this year with 2 piles, and I noticed the pile with grass clippings included composted a lot quicker. I think the grass acts as nitrogen to expedite the composting process. I wonder if the tomato plants will do the same. Thanks for the informative video. Yeah, 468 Strings. I can't believe I haven't talked much about compost this year. It is a subject near and dear to my heart. Yes, I compost almost everything that comes out of my garden and out of my kitchen and all kinds of crazy things. Compost is necessary these days because it's hard to trust it's hard to trust anything that comes from a bag of manure or from hay from the store, because it's been sprayed oftentimes with aminopyrrolate herbicide. And so I need to make my own soil amendments, and that's why I compost. Let me show you my compost bin. That is my compost system. It ain't much of a system. It's a 4x4 cube of space in which everything from the garden and everything from the kitchen gets dumped in. And I made this a few years ago intending to have a 3-bin system, but I've really just used that one. Let me show you what's in there right now. Currently in my compost bin, I have almost finished compost. In fact, down below here, below my fork there, the compost is finished. And so that's quite a bit of compost, about 2 feet deep, that is about ready to go into my garden this year for my summer crops and my winter crops. Everything on top of here, that's unfinished compost, just started. This is my long beans, my dragon tongue beans that have been tossed in here, and you can see there's some table scraps, and you can also see that this compost pile is cold right now. It's not heating up because most of it's finished, like I said. But in here will go all my greens from the garden that are not diseased. I don't want to throw powdery mildew spores in here. I don't want to put blight in here. And also what goes in here is cardboard, paper scraps, paper towels, food, every kind of food, everything from the kitchen, meat, cheese, bones, chicken, casseroles, old paper that's been shredded. All of these egg cartons here act as carbon for my garden, sticks that are rotten down, leaves that I've collected. All kinds of good stuff goes into my compost bin. What else goes into my compost bin? Dead animals. I threw a rat in here the other day. Anything that was once living goes into my compost pile. Now here's the deal. People say, oh, you can't put that in compost. Go watch my composting video. I'll link it right up at the top there. And you'll find that you can put all that stuff in compost. It doesn't really matter. You just have to do it wisely. You have to have a hot composting pile, and you have to be able to put that in the middle, your nasty, stinky stuff, in the middle of your compost pile, and it will disappear. Even bones will disappear in a matter of weeks if you got a good compost pile. I'm going to try to show you what's in here underneath this layer of unfinished compost. I'm going to dig down and see if I can't show you what's going on. Look at that. This is almost finished. Most of it's finished. It's not warm. It kind of is warm. But this is my compost that's going in my garden this year. And this is all, every bit of this is homemade. This compost has been brewing here for quite a while. And it's filled with good nutrition for my soil life. Yeah, it's good stuff. I also compost in this lovely little system right here. What's in here is pretty nasty. This is an anaerobic compost. It is anaerobic brew. So what's in there is weeds. There's a bunch of chicken carcass in there. There's all kinds of nasty stuff in here. And this has been in here for almost a year. And I just top it off with water, and it rots down into this delicious, nasty, gnarly brew of nutrition. It smells like raw sewage. It is very good to make compost tea with to fertilize your garden, but it stinks to high heaven. And that's why I keep these bricks on there, because whatever's living in there you don't want coming out until you're in control of it. So let this rot down. Take about 1 to 10 ratio water to fertilizer. Water your gardens with it, and that's good stuff. That's good compost tea. Yes, it's anaerobic. It's not safe to eat vegetables that have been treated with this stuff for at least a week. And by that time, anaerobic bacteria that live in here cannot survive in an oxygenated environment, and the aerobic bacteria that you want in your regular compost takes over this stuff and renders it safe. Once the plants take it up in their roots, it's fine. But this is an ancient method of fertilizing with stuff you have on your property. You got weeds, throw them in here. Get the nutrition back from your weeds that they're robbing from your soil. Just put them in there, let it rot down. Good stuff. So yes, compost is very important. Compost is food for the microbiology in your soil. Compost doesn't feed your plants directly, but it does feed the life in the soil, which then in turn breaks down the elements in your soil to provide nutrition for your plants. Yeah, compost everything. Question number 5. A lot of questions ask, what is a good tomato that survives the heat? A heat-tolerant tomato variety. I'm not sure how many of you have asked me this recently, but it's been a lot. So what are some good heat-tolerant varieties? Really, my problem is I love tomatoes too much. I like to grow all kinds of eclectic and oddball heirloom varieties, or things that just tickle my fancy. And by doing that, I often stumble on tomato varieties that are not heat tolerant and don't make it well here. Well, that's what happened this year. About half my tomato plants have died. And yeah, I didn't grow real heat tolerant varieties on purpose. I accidentally found one though. It's called Wood's Famous Bremer. And so far it has been my best performing tomato this year. Wood's Famous Bremer. It's about a tennis ball, or a little bit larger than tennis ball sized tomato. And it's put on at least 24 tomatoes on one plant for me, and it's still ripening them even in this heat. And it seems to me like the birds haven't really found those tomatoes very appealing, but they actually are very delicious tomatoes. They're a real good slicer. They ripen up real nice, real red throughout, and I take them in just as they're starting to get rosy, so the birds don't actually see the red and find them and come investigate and try to find moisture in there and tear up my tomato. But they do ripen quite well with very little white pith on the inside. And man, they're just really delicious. So Wood's Famous Bremer, that's one of them that I stumbled on this year. But other varieties in my area that have performed well during the summer, Roma tomatoes, just your plain old Roma tomato. seems to me to make it through the summer quite nicely. San Marzano Romas have done well for me in the past as well, but the plain old Roma, the determinate Roma tomato, which sometimes doesn't act like a determinate, that's a very good option for places where there's a lot of heat. Also, Florentino Costelluto, I'm sorry, it's called Costelluto Florentino, a very bold-looking ribbed heirloom with lots of airspace inside once you cut it open. It's not the most tasty tomato in the world, but a homegrown tomato is better than any store-bought tomato. So Costelluto Florentino grew for me all through the summer a couple years back, and I was impressed with how much fruit I got out of it. Good for making sauce, good for stuffing, a pretty decent tomato, Costelluto Florentino. Let's see, there's some other tomatoes that have done good for me in the summer. Juliet, which is a hybrid sold by Bonnie Plants, often found at the Home Depot. It's a cherry tomato that's kind of a pear-shaped. It's like a miniature Roma, but it's all juicy like a cherry tomato instead of a Roma. So Juliet grew all summer long for me, did not stop putting on fruit, grew through the winter and kept putting on fruit all through the winter, and come this spring, this year, in a 5-gallon bucket, that Juliet kept growing, and I had tomatoes in January and February. The problem with the Juliet is I didn't like the skin. It's supposed to be disease and crack resistant, and it is because it's got a skin like leather. And so if you're into cherry tomatoes and you don't mind a tough skin, then the Juliet tomato is a very good heat-loving tomato. So yeah, heat-loving tomatoes. Speaking of tomatoes, Master Sergeant Jim asks, I'm curious as to what type of bird eats your tomatoes. I'm never bothered by birds on my tomatoes, and I have hundreds of birds in my garden as I provide a lot of habitat, food, and water for them. Yeah, Jim, when a tomato like this right here starts to get rosy like that and starts to turn, this is, by the way, the Woods' famous Brimmer with all these fruits on it. When it starts to get like that, it attracts mockingbirds. Mockingbirds are not interested in eating the tomato so much as they are in getting the moisture that's inside. The standard answer to that is, well, why don't you put up a bird bath and provide moisture for the birds? Mockingbirds don't come to bird baths either. I've never seen a mockingbird. I've had bird baths, and I've never seen a mockingbird come to a bird bath. Not to say they don't. Maybe you've got a mockingbird at your bird bath right now as you're watching this, but I've tried all the tricks. I've tried a bird bath. I've tried a bird bath with a fountain. I've tried all kinds of things to get the birds out. But what they're doing is they're coming to get the moisture out of here. It's easy for them to be hydrated by eating the flesh of a tomato, and usually they poke at it and poke a hole in it about the size of a quarter. Sometimes they eat the entire, half the tomato off, and then they fly off. Sometimes they go around and they sample all your tomatoes. I've also seen cardinals do the same. Cardinals around here in the heat will come and peck your tomatoes, and you can see that distinctive finch-shaped beak hole in a tomato. And yeah, it's very frustrating. But that's the kind of bird that does it around here. Master Sergeant Jim, it's the mockingbird. And I have a mockingbird who lives just right over there and sings and sings and sings, beautiful song. Sings at 3 in the morning, frustrates everybody. Can't shoot him with a pellet gun because he's the state bird. I wouldn't do it anyway. They're wonderful singers, but they're also frustrating in the tomato garden. That's almost ready to pick. I'll pick that tomorrow, and this one. Maybe even that one. As they start to blush, I'll pick them and take them indoors where the birds won't get them. But yeah, this is a Woods' famous Brimmer, and I've already harvested tons of tomatoes off of this, but you can see I've got quite a bit more. And while all the rest of my plants are dead or dying, like that one there, and I've showed you in my other videos how summer has been decimating my tomatoes, this guy, though he looks like he's strained out, stressed and strained, and it is still doing strong. So after these tomatoes here are harvested, all my tomato plants will be coming out, and I'll be growing other things in there. Well, there we have episode number 10 of Gardening Question and Answers in the bag. So yeah, a fewer questions this time, but if you have a question and you don't need an answer like right now, it's not an emergency. If you just have a generic gardening question, or any question about even my garden and how I do things, or how you can do things better, drop me a comment below and I'll see if I can get to it. I can't guarantee I'll get to all of them. I picked the ones out that I actually know I'm not going to try to give you an answer that I don't know or don't have experience with. So leave me a comment there. We'd appreciate if you subscribe to our channel. We're just about on the threshold of 70,000 subscribers. That blows me away. In fact, when this video posts, we might be there. Thank you so much. That's so encouraging, and I've had the best year I've ever had so far as a YouTube content creator, and I want to continue to give you good content. So, yeah, leave me some questions. I want to give you content that's relative to you. Follow us on Facebook and like us on Instagram. We post lots of pictures of our garden. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.